I've got to say, this panel to be a segue from something that Leah said about power is kind of a perfect introduction, because improving food policy takes power. And what I have asked each of the panelists to do is to suggest one thing in a particular area that they feel could be done to improve food policy. Now, I'm going to ask Adriano to go first, but here's a little bit of trivia you should know. Adriano is a congressman from the 13th District in New York, which is the smallest congressional district in the country, geographically, but not in terms of population. Then Marion Nestle, who is the professor emerita at NYU, Steinberg School, and Tom Colicchio, celebrity chef, restaurateur, and activist. So, Adriano, what one thing could be done to improve food policy if, in fact, we believe there is food policy in this country?
Well, rather than answer from the Washington type of way, right? Which is sort of like to promote legislation or to talk about SNAP or WIC or some of the Farm Bill. I think that particularly in New York City, you have a wealth of opportunity if we go out and engage the diverse communities of New York City. For example, the district that I represent has people from West Africa, Dominicans, Mexicans, all of which are very much connected to the food experience and to agriculture.
Even in the city?
Well, they come from that background. And so for me to see corn coming up in one of the Broadway malls in the middle, it's not surprising. Some guy that probably back in the island had corn and he sees things. And so to engage those communities in the urban agriculture movement, I think is critical to this entire conversation. We have the wealth of diversity and experiences right in front of us. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, if you may. We have those people with the experiences, the background, the history of agriculture from all over the world that could be such a great asset to policy, right? But first and foremost, addressing food deserts, dietary needs of certain communities that show up in our health, and everything else. And then we'll be able to more aggressively take on the fight about cuts in SNAP and WIC, and whether or not we should provide a tax break or some type of benefit to people that do rooftop farming or urban farming, which I think is a new movement that we should all encourage and support.
Thank you. Marion, what about nutrition? What can we do in terms of food policy?
Well, Florence, you didn't specify whether it needed to be realistic or not.
No, it doesn't have to be realistic.
So let me start with the ideal. The single most important factor in poor nutrition is poverty. Let's have a guaranteed annual income for everybody.
Okay. You know,
we're agreed on that. Let's go lobby.
That's right.
No, but proposing things that may not seem realistic today may be realistic in 10, 15, 20 years. 150 years ago, the idea of Social Security was probably not realistic. So what are we talking about?
We're talking about making it possible for people to afford to buy healthy food.
Yeah. And Tom, what about making it all sustainable? Because that's so critical today.
Well, we'll get there. Let me just talk about what I think, sort of to tag on to what Marion said. If you believe that education is the key to upward mobility, and yet we're sending kids to school who are hungry, clearly hungry, and if we believe nutrition is the key to education, then we should actually fund universal free lunch for every student in this country.
Don't we do that in New York already?
We do. There is community eligibility in New York, yes.
Yeah, we do that here.
But also couple that with a robust farm to cafeteria program So now you actually have farmers that have a market for their specialty crops in the school system. And so that to me would be a policy that's a win-win for both farmers and for children. Also for parents.
Yeah, and we're doing that here in New York, and it works.
We do it in New York, and it works, yes, except that it's under attack right now by the Trump administration, because if they actually get rid of certified eligibility, we're going to see 1 million children go off of the school lunch program and also lose SNAP.
Well, actually...
let me pinpoint one aspect of this, and Adriano, I think you're the best person to respond to this. The divide between state regulation, state benefits, and the federal government, because they're two different things, and I think they cover two different areas. What can you tell us about that?
Well, first, of course, state legislation in some cases has been very archaic and old. For example, it was just this year that New York State passed the farm workers bill. You know, I brought to Albany when I was a state senator, Dolores Huertas, who marched with Chavez in the West Coast and organized farm workers there. And she couldn't believe that just until this year, farm workers could not organize, farm workers could not get a day off work. Farm workers were working under inhumane conditions. And this is right here in New York State, the Empire State. Apple pickers and dairy farm dairy workers.
And it's like one of the hugest agricultural states in the country. That's
correct. And so there is a difference, obviously, between state legislation and federal legislation. But at the federal level, I think that we have great opportunities. When we talk about a potential infrastructure bill, and what exactly is infrastructure? Is it just the traditional road, bridges, and tunnels? I say no. I say it should be a green infrastructure bill to promote not only urban farms, urban agriculture, but also to promote the green economy and jobs. I was speaking to a group of young people from the Job Corps this morning. I said, you know, you got to think about what prevailing wage is. None of them really knew what it was. Prevailing wage is what people get paid in these construction jobs. You know, you're talking about $150 an hour, $200 an hour. You could train these young people through an infrastructure bill that includes urban agriculture to make money, to be part of the economic boom of a new green industry. That's the challenge that we have, because our roads and bridges and tunnels are falling apart. You go anywhere in the world and you see how bad we're doing. We must inject some money in that. And to do that, we got to do it right. We got to do it green. We got to include the urban agricultural aspect of it, which is connected to our health. I defer. I think the school lunches are crappy. I think you need to bring a chef to every school that will guarantee that every student will eat the right food.
I agree.
You know, kids are getting crappy lunch, and they hyper and sugar, and it reflects in their classroom work because they don't have the span of attention to read a paragraph. And so we must do this holistically, right? You may say, well, what does infrastructure have to do with all of this?
But isn't the contracts with big business to get these school lunch programs and to provide them, isn't that a big problem?
I've been in schools in New York that have fabulous.
I was in the cafeteria in the Lower East Side 2 days ago.
Public schools.
And the food was actually good also because wellness in the schools is actually making a very big impact in the schools in New York City that they have partnered with. So my mother ran a school lunch program in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and she would tell me stories that she would fight every day to bring fruits and vegetables in. And when I was trying to get her to retire, because I always thought that the time that she spent in school was kind of social time for her. But she told me a story that she had to fight to get healthy food in to the school lunch program. She was afraid that once she left, it would go to all sort of commercial feeding. But we can change it. But you know what the other thing you do, if you actually create a more robust school lunch program and you actually have chefs in cafeterias, there's plenty of money in the Farm Bill for equipment for cafeterias. You're creating jobs. Because right now, there's a handful of people working in school in each school district, in each cafeteria, and you can actually create jobs that way too. So this is, it's a win-win if you're talking about school lunch. 30 million children use the school lunch program every day in this country, except for the weekends. obviously. So this, we're talking about impact a lot of people.
But we're talking on a local level. I mean, this is not overall federal kind of legislation.
It's funded federally.
Yeah, everything is local in schools.
Yeah, the schools, but it's all funded with federal dollars.
That's correct, but still, you have an obesity crisis in New York City public schools. In my
Not just New York.
Not yet, but in my district, you probably have one of the worst obesity levels, leading to asthma, childhood diabetes, leading to absenteeism in the schools. And it's all connected with what they're eating.
Yes.
It's all connected to a food desert that's connected to a school with crappy food.
Well, it's connected to poverty.
You know, why not have food salads in the cafeterias?
They do in plenty of schools.
Well, you know, many of them, most of them don't. Most of them don't. In poor neighborhoods.
I've been to schools in some of the poorest neighborhoods in New York, and they've got
I'm sure,
and they're doing a really great job.
Well, then it should show up in the obesity crisis, and it's not.
Yeah, but obesity, it's different. I mean, you're talking obesity, it's really a symptom of poverty. When you have very little dollars to spend money on, you're buying the cheapest stuff possible.
We're back to poverty again.
Right, the cheapest stuff possible has a ton of calories. Listen, in this country, calories are cheap, nutrition's expensive. And so that's the question, is how do you actually change that? And can you change that through better policy?
And I agree with that, I still think that for the most part, there's much to be done in the school cafeteria.
Sure.
I think for the most part, there's still a lot to be done in neighborhoods with food deserts and with very crappy bodega food. Why not transform the bodegas? They're cultural in scope, right? Bodegas now worth, how many people know what a bodega is?
New York, yeah, we're New York. Yeah.
Everybody does. We're New Yorkers.
It's in the English dictionary now, right? And so why not transform the bodega? I speak to the Bodega Association. I said, you know, you're getting left behind. Besides, you're only selling items of first need. You're selling beer, Pampers, you know, and bad food. And that's why you're shutting down. Why not transform into a new business that would all offer healthy foods that would attract this entire movement? And particularly, even in gentrifying neighborhoods, they find themselves in this, with their backs to the wall, because they're conducting business in the hallway, and the new neighborhood no longer caters to what they offer.
Well,
but we must have a movement to do that, right? Mm-hmm. We must have a movement to work with the bodegas, with the supermarkets that are there now.
Right. There are programs now where actually bodegas can actually, I think they receive money for refrigeration.
Right.
That's
because
correct.
Right now it's a problem. They don't have refrigeration, so you can't sell fruit and vegetables. But there is a program by which they can actually tap into dollars.
Con Edison has a program. We had 650 businesses transformed to smart energy equipment. I went to a bodega with the motor sounding like a Tyrannosaurus, and I asked her, how much light are you paying every month in the summer months? It's about $3,000, almost half my rent. I said, what about if you get you $1,000 and you put in a new refrigerating equipment that will cater to those produce, right? Mm-hmm. And at the same time, you will save $1,500 a month in your pocket. And we did that, and it worked, and it saved them $1,500. That wasn't his bottom line. But at the same time, you have produce that now are healthy and you can feed the community.
But healthy eating has to start before children get to school, when they're infants. And I don't know that there's any kind of program that instructs new parents on how to feed a child.
Sure there is.
And what should be done.
SNAP program.
I don't know that the medical community has bought into these ideas at all, because the medical community in the U.S., by and large, is about giving a pill to cure something. So what can we do in that direction?
In Bellevue Hospital, well, actually, there's Michelle Nishan's group, Wholesome Wave. They have a prescription plan where you actually go to a doctor and they prescribe fruits and vegetables, and then you get the double bucks backs that up. So if you are on SNAP, you can actually go to a farm stand and you actually get double the amount of the money on your purchase. So actually, no, this is happening. There's oh God, I lost track of my train of thought here. Sorry. Go ahead.
Go back to your question.
Right.
No, I mean, how to get, because parents have to know.
Oh, SNAP Ed.
Who's educating parents? That's a problem.
By the time they're in school, it may even be too late.
Yeah, but so there's also something called SNAP Ed. There's a whole education portion of SNAP where they're actually teaching people of low income actually how to stretch a dollar about nutrition. Right now, I think Governor Cuomo just signed a bill where he brought in $12.9 million into New York State, and groups like New York City Food Bank tapped into that money for education, not to actually give out food, but for education. Cornell Cooperative Extension, each district they're in had received about $800,000 of that money. So no, there is an emphasis in these programs on nutritional education as well. It's not just handing out food.
Yeah, but I don't think enough is being done.
Of course not. Of course not. No, the question, that's because we don't have policies. We need policies for these things. So that's why we have government, is to do this. So that's why, in theory, we have government to do this.
Mm-hmm. But what would you say to do in order to enlighten people who do not have a good nutritional profile? I mean, where would we start?
I think you start by going into the communities and asking people in the communities what they think they need to be healthier. Yeah. You start there. I'm not comfortable going into communities and telling people what to do. I think from an educational standpoint, we know it works. Community-based, bottom-up, and boy, do we need that now.
Yeah. I work with an organization called Feast, and we're doing just this. We're in communities, teaching people about nutrition, giving people life skills to focus on nutrition. We had our first graduating class last year, and the students that were there, just they couldn't believe the amount of information they got. We also supply them with pots and pans for their graduation, and so there are people that are doing this work in communities all over this country.
There are thousands of organizations.
But they're funding, and this is the bigger problem, is that all this is getting funded through charity, and this stuff should be getting funded through government
policy. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, you know who's getting funding through the government, and this is, if there is food policy in this country, it's subsidizing farmers to grow cash crops industrially, rather than helping small farmers growing nutritional food. They're growing soybeans, which we're not selling to China now because we know why. But seriously, aren't those policies outdated? The subsidies for farmers?
Of course they're outdated. I mean, what we really need now, we need a combined, coordinated food policy that deals with undernutrition, overnutrition, and climate change at the same time. And that means a largely, but not necessarily exclusively, plant-based diet, and avoidance of junk foods. And that's a healthy diet, that's good, a diet that's good for people and the planet. And we need to have agriculture policy and health policy united around those goals. Do we have that now? Of course not.
Right.
Aren't there some crops, I have heard that there are crops like wheat, for example, the wheat that's grown today to be milled into flour is not as nutritional as it was 100 years ago, and therefore they have to put back all of these additives.
Yeah, there's some evidence along those lines, but it depends on what's being grown, and it's very hard to know how much it's changed. I mean, what we do know is that eating foods is healthier than eating food products. That we know without question. So why don't we have a food policy that promotes eating food, not food products? And that means small, local farmers.
We need policy for eaters.
We need policy for eaters.
That's what we need.
Yeah.
We need eating policy.
Right. I mean, instead of right now, food is a commodity. It's sold like any other widget.
And a lot of it is imported.
Food is having an impact even beyond the state and our nation. In fact, many people see the immigration crisis or the immigration development in the southern border as simply that. When in fact, if you go down to the triangle countries where immigrants are coming from, it's a food security issue. You hear about the gangs and the violence.
El Salvador and Guatemala,
but for the most part,
Honduras,
they've been enduring a 6-year drought that's horrible, and it's killed their agriculture, and it's forcing women, for the most part, at least that's what I've seen down at the border, to walk hundreds of miles through deserts and mountains to save their families and their children. So this has an impact way beyond our country and the state. In fact, we should be assisting, if we really want to address this immigration issue, we should be assisting those three countries in particular, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, which is where the bulks, they're not coming from Mexico anymore. 12%, less than 12% of the people being sent back are from Mexico. They're coming from those three triangle countries, and we should be assisting them with dealing with their drought, with agriculture, and their food security issues, so we address the immigration issue.
It would be nice if we had a sustainable foreign policy, too.
That would be
that
nice,
comes under the umbrella called foreign aid, and foreign aid is a tiny percentage
it's a drop in the bucket,
of the federal budget, and it's made into this boogeyman, and anytime you can cut it, and it doesn't help these countries.
But I went down to El Salvador and met with the new young president there, Bukele, who is working hard to address that issue. And he said, help me with my agriculture. Let's begin to help the farmers here. And you will see how there will be a dramatic drop in migration to the U.S. And so these are policy issues that go beyond the United States and are really, planet-wide.
Does the UN play any kind of a role?
They should play a role, but the UN is really responding more to the wars and very violent conflicts across the world as opposed to this. And this is really one that they should pay attention to, as well as the Organization of American States.
But it's never been our foreign policy to help local farmers in these countries. We want them buying our agricultural products, not making their own.
Right. So the question came up earlier. How do you bring bend the cost curve of fruits and vegetables so they are more affordable and more people? And there is always a question of whether or not subsidies could do that. Number one, we don't pay direct subsidies to farmers anymore, with the exception of this recent ton of money that went because of the trade. Take that aside, it's all crop insurance now, so it's no more direct subsidies. And so the question is, if you move some of that crop insurance to fruits and vegetables, which very few farmers actually can tap into, can that change it? But the better question is, can we actually spend more dollars in research and development? We spent a ton of money in research and development over the last 40 years to grow more corn and more soy on the same sort of acreage. And so we're seeing drastic increases of corn and soy. Can we spend some money in research and development to spend money on specialty crops, otherwise known as fruits and vegetables, to try to increase the yield? If you can increase the yield, and then through better transportation, which is an infrastructure problem, then you can actually start bringing the cost of fruits and vegetables down. Most people who are struggling, it's not that they don't want fruits and vegetables, they can't afford them. And that's the real crisis that we have right now is people who want to tap into better nutrition. So it's a question of whether or not they know about it. They do know about it. People that I've come in contact with, boy, they want better food. So when my wife and I should say my wife, before she made the film A Place at the Table, it came about because we were mentoring a young girl. She was living in the shelter. She would come to our house, and you know what she wanted? She said, please give me a salad. That's what she wanted. But she couldn't afford that. Her family couldn't afford that. Whether or not she can actually find it in her community, the question is they couldn't afford that. So what did they do? They lived on oodles and noodles, and they couldn't actually drink the water coming out of out of the shelter because it was horrible. And so they would have to buy soda because that was cheaper than actually bottled water. And so this is a question. How do we get the cost of nutrition down in this country? We're
down to about a minute. There's one thing I did want to bring up in relating to what you just said, Tom, and that is you have a company that used to be Monsanto, it's now Bayer, and what are they selling? What are they doing? They're giving corn seed to farmers in the third world, and what it turns out to have happen is this seed does not regenerate, so the farmers cannot save the corn seed from their crops.
Well, they're not allowed to.
No, they're not allowed to. So for the government to put a stop to these kinds of practices would help a great deal. Now we only have 45 seconds. 15-second wrap-up, Marion.
Oh, just get out there and advocate about these issues. Do everything that you can. Locally, at the state level, at the national level, to try to get a decent food system here.
Adriano?
Every cloud has a silver lining. I think that every crisis presents a great opportunity. Let's get urban agriculture moving. Let's concentrate and engage diversity in the city of New York.
Okay, I have to cut you off. Tom, you have 10 seconds. I'm sorry.
So when I was with Food Policy Action, not anymore, but we published a scorecard. We graded Congress on how they voted on various food issues. Spent some time on that website. I believe they're still doing it. And my feeling is that when legislators lose their job on the way they vote around food issues, then we'll have a food movement. Until we actually take this social movement and turn it into a more of a social movement and turn it into a political movement, we're not going to get traction. And that's what we all need to do. We really need to get out there and vote this as a single issue. Food is something every single person in this country eats 3 times a day if they can afford it. And we actually need to demand better policy, because nothing is going to start from the top down. I'm sorry to say this, but policy doesn't start from the top down. It starts from the ground up, and we need all to be activists.
Thank you all.